All right, we're back. It's another Carolina podcast, special quarantine edition. For the first time, I don't know if ever, but in a very, very long time, Wes and Chris and I are all in different places doing this on the phone, but making it happen for you, the listeners, because we love you and we value you and we appreciate you. And this quarantine is not going to stop us from producing compelling content. So, Wes and Chris, thanks for taking some time out of your busy quarantine days to call in and make this happen. It feels weird not to be looking at y'all recording this.
It does, and we're not going to be able to point at each other for who's going to talk next either, but, you know, we'll get through it. I know everybody out there is probably, already at the point of, you can only watch so much Netflix, you know what I mean? So hopefully we'll be at least, hopefully some people will think we're a little bit entertaining and can maybe provide a little bit of sports talk amidst what is a very, very weird time, I think for everybody right now.
Yeah, very bizarre. I disagree with you that you can only watch so much Netflix. There's a lot of stuff on there, but hopefully this helps break up the monotony, if nothing else. Before we get into some Carolina news, because we actually have some things to talk about today, we don't have to dip into the evergreen well of oh gosh, what are we talking about? Just quite yet. I'm sure we will. This quarantine, I think, is going to last a little bit, so we will get there. We do have some Carolina news today, but before we do any of that, I just want to know what it's been like for y'all. Just pull back the curtain a little bit. I know y'all both work from home. Chris, you and I were just talking about that. What has this been like for you so far?
It really hasn't been any different. I've been fortunate enough to do this job since 2009 full-time. So May of 2009 was when I started with Gamecock Central full-time covering football and recruiting. And so I've worked – we've never had an office. Maybe we will one day. We'll have some massive complex or something like that. That would be pretty cool. But, so we've worked from home since then. And so, I think you got to get creative. I finally got to the point really maybe last year where I like to get out a little bit more and, I don't know, go to a coffee shop or which I've done that in the past, but I do it a little bit more now. Go to the library, hunker down in a study room, something like that, just to sort of break up that monotony. But the only difference, a big difference for us right now is our kids are at home. And so, my wife's at home, kids are at home. And so we're, my wife has been teacher, while all this is going on. And so it's been a little bit different, but it's also been pretty cool, frankly, because we've been able to, have a little bit more family time and stuff like that. And I'm, there's still plenty for us to do at Gamecock Central. There's no games to cover, but we've been talking a lot about content and stories, and I feel like we're going to have plenty of stuff to roll out. So it's been pretty interesting.
Yeah, I don't know if it's just because I've been, I guess, a little more online than I normally am, but it feels like y'all are churning out maybe even more content than you normally do, which is funny because there's fewer things to talk about, and it's like, okay, well, what can you actually do? Because there's no spring practice, and recruiting has been put on a halt, and we're going to get into a little bit later in the podcast what exactly that means for South Carolina, because obviously you don't have to see someone in person anymore to talk to them, because we're doing it right now. Shout out Alexander Graham Bell. But y'all have been killing it, still crushing it with the content, and hopefully this is going to end up being as good a content as y'all normally put on the website. Wes, what's it been like for you?
Yeah, like Chris said, the work side of it really doesn't change. I think it's just about sort of, personal life. As you know, I don't necessarily guess everybody else or anybody else really knows, but, I'm big into my group classes there at the gym. And I had actually stopped going, I guess this weekend anyway, just because I was like, all right, if we're all going to be social distancing, being in a small room with 15 other people, breathing and sweating on each other, probably not the best idea in the first place. But then, those got canceled anyway. So it's just been sort of, kind of trying to find some way at home to try and take care of that aspect of my life. But otherwise, I have been burning through some shows. I actually just got on. We had a huge thread on the site, man, about people giving their show
suggestions, and I've been burning through Mr. Robot at night, which is actually on Amazon Prime Video if you have that out there.
And you like it?
Dude, I love it.
Okay.
I love it. I don't know if it's for everybody, but I had seen maybe 1 or 2 episodes of it when it first came out. But I'm much more likely to fly through a show if pretty much all of it is already finished and I can sort of watch at my own pace. So I've been watching that, man. But yeah, I just, and obviously we're going to talk a lot of sports here. And for everybody trying to flip off already, we're not going to talk about the coronavirus, the entire show or anything. But I just, for the sake of all of us, I've been that guy. I'm like, can we all just do our part, here for the next month or so, or however long it takes? And I see some people sort of just ignoring it, that there's still a belief out there that from some people that this is like media driven or something, which is just a crazy thought to me. Like I'm just hopeful, not that, most people are going to be absolutely fine, but we all have, I'd imagine we all have elderly people around us that we're close to, and loved ones and stuff that are at higher risk. And, hopefully we can all sort of bunker down a little bit and try to slow the spread of this thing. And even if that reason doesn't appeal for you, then, hey, the quicker we all sort of listen to this and can kind of hopefully slow the spread, then maybe the quicker everything gets back to normal. If that's more, you're listening and that's more your worry right now, I think the quicker we all just do what we're asked to do, then maybe we can slow the spread. I guess we'll see. And everything can more quickly get back to normal. Because right now, I mean, I know, initially, I don't think the shock sort of set in how big of a deal this was for a lot of people at first, myself included at the very beginning. And it's interesting how sports are almost, for a lot of us, a barometer how serious something is, because, at first, I think just playing games with no fans in the stands, we're like, oh wow, this is crazy. And then, I mean, even at the time, I was like, they're not going to cancel the NCAA basketball tournament. And now, less than a week later, that was a foregone conclusion. And then I was like, surely they're not going to have to cancel all spring sports. And then quickly you start to realize more and more information. You're like, there's no way they're not going to cancel all spring sports, Mm-hmm. And, baseball, MLB goes from they might have to push the season back to, hey guys, are we going to be able to have baseball in July? It's like, I think we all quickly just sort of got, I won't say blindsided, but I think it set in for a lot of people, I think, of how big this thing is when all the sports started getting canceled. Because I think even if you sort of stay out of the world news and the political realm of things, when sports start getting canceled, I think people are starting to take a little bit more notice.
I think that's a good way to put it, and that it's a barometer. It's sort of the last vestige, and the comparison that a lot of people have made, and enough people have made it that I don't think I need to preface it by saying this is not a direct comparison, but I would rather be safe than sorry. This is not a direct comparison, but I've heard a lot of people just in terms of the approach to sports and to just sort of the collective mentality of society right now to the immediate aftermath of 9/11, where everything was sort of put on hold because there's an understanding that, whoa, this is a really unique and really, in the case of 9/11, really terrible. In the case of COVID-19, really potentially terrible in a different kind of way, a different kind of devastation. And it makes you really step back. There are a lot of tragedies that occur in this. I mean, there are tragedies that occur in this country every year. And there are things like sports and entertainment that are used to sort of bring people back together. It's a communal experience. It helps us, on the one hand, escape a little bit and forget about some of the things that are going on. And in some cases, we can take advantage of sporting events like what they were going to do with the SEC basketball tournament in terms of using the revenue there to help raise money for tornado relief in Nashville. There are both practical, monetary, financial, as well as emotional applications for sports and entertainment in terms of giving us a respite from some of the harder things that we have to deal with on a day-to-day basis in life. And when that's canceled, it puts into stark relief both how important those things are in our life and, like, actually important. I know a lot of people say, oh, well, you know, it's just a game. And yes, it is. But, like, we collectively as a society have determined that these are the things that we like to do communally that really bring us together in a way that nothing else quite does. And when that's taken away from us, it not only highlights how dramatic the situation is, but also, again, how important those things are to us. So it's been really interesting, and it's kind of sobering. And I mean, even with 9/11, it was a couple of weeks and things were back to normal. Things might not get back to normal with this for a couple of months. So we're in completely uncharted territory. We may never be in a scenario like this in terms of what the three of us do in this line of work for the rest of our lives, where all sports are just canceled. Except I think I saw curling on TV last night or something like that. But by and large, pretty much everything has been canceled around the world, and it's a unique position. And you're right. We're just trying to do our part, and I think it's important for us to keep doing this. And I think it's important that we're doing it like we're doing it, because I don't know. I don't think we're like, role models for anybody, or I don't necessarily think we should be, or I don't think I should be. Maybe y'all should be, but I feel like
I shouldn't be either.
I feel like we're doing our part here because we're both kind of continuing with our normal lives as best we can, but also, respecting some of the things that are in place to try to, mitigate the spread of the virus. And basically we're trying to do our part, but we don't have to completely shut down our lives. We still talk. We're still going to do our podcast. We're still going to work. We're still going to create content and things like that, because I think that's also really important, as we all, again, are in a completely unique situation, one that none of us will probably ever be in again. But it's important to not lose every part of normalcy in our day-to-day life, because this might be the new normal. So we need to, I guess, kind of get used to this. So I guess that's my 2 cents in terms of why it's important for me that we keep doing this. Obviously, like I said, today we do have some actual Gamecock news things to talk about, but I think it's important for everybody listening to this, continue with as much normalcy in your life as you possibly can, while still respecting what's in place in terms of what we can do to help and do our part. And with that, before I forget, because I want to go back to something you said earlier, Wes, you mentioned not doing your group gym classes. That is a real bummer. My girlfriend and I have been going to the Y a lot and doing a bunch of classes out there, and we were actually finishing up a bar class on Sunday when we got the news that everything was shutting down, like the Y and all the schools and group classes and things like that. Have you, though, been back to the gym, not in a group class capacity, but just to work out yourself in the gym?
Not in the gym. I actually got with a few folks that I work out with at the gym anyway, and we did an outside workout. We actually went running yesterday, which anybody who knows me knows that running distances is one of my least favorite things to do in the world. But I like the social aspect of group classes, but also like the routine of going. I go about the same time every day, and just the structure of, hey, do this, but it's going to be something that's constantly changing. Do this for a little while, but then we're going to move to this workout. We're going to move to this exercise. So just running for any type of distance is really not what I enjoy doing. But that's what we're doing right now. That's what we got to do. So everyone, I guess that's the least we can all do, is adjust small parts of our day-to-day life to try and distance ourselves from others. And, obviously not, it's mandatory now, but obviously not eating out at restaurants. We can get stuff to go. And I've been all in on the support local business thing. I haven't cooked a thing. I'm using this as a positive excuse to be like, oh yeah, we need to support these restaurants. I'm just going to order takeout for every single meal. I'm giving myself an excuse to eat some of these awesome local restaurants that we have, that obviously restaurant entertainment is going to struggle for a while. So going out, getting to go and then taking it home and eating it, nothing wrong with that right now, and actually can support some of our local businesses that way.
Yeah, and we're recording this on a Takeout Wednesday, so by the time you hear this is going to be we're recording this in the morning. You're going to hear it a little bit later in the afternoon, hopefully. And it's Takeout Wednesday, so even if you're someone that's inclined to cook, take advantage of it today and go get some pizza or some sandwiches or something. And I don't know, I haven't checked what the full list of places that are still offering takeout service, what the full list of places offering takeout is. Had to make sure my verbs agreed there. But I don't know if y'all want to see me or if I want to see y'all. We can gather as long as it's like fewer than 10 people. So I don't know if this would be an opportunity for the three of us to take out Andy's and Groucho's and do the test once and for all as we get into maybe a little bit of a I don't know what to call it. But for the sake of some content a little bit later on in this quarantine, but that's still an option even if we won't be able to eat in there. Chris, Wes mentioned that he was watching Mr. Robot. I know y'all have both been working like you normally do because y'all work from home anyway. Have you had the opportunity to binge any shows or watch any movies in the early goings of this quarantine?
I thought I would maybe, I don't know why I thought this. I thought I would have a little bit more time. I haven't. We've spent the evenings, we've gone outside, and we've sort of, we had some new neighbors move in who have a couple kids we've known for a while, actually, and been letting the kids play outside really until it gets dark. We'll go outside at 4 or 5 and let them play and, still keep a little bit of a distance. But, and I had everybody worried yesterday because I'm sitting there coughing up a storm. I'm like, look, it's seriously just allergies.
It is the worst time to have allergies.
Wrecking me. Yeah, it really is. And it's been just, allergies, pollen's been wrecking me. But we've been doing that a lot. And, I did start – we've watched a couple shows that we just normally watch on network anyway, my wife and I. But I did start watching Bloodline on Netflix recently. And it has been really good so far. I think I've watched 2 or 3. It's got Coach Taylor in it. And so from Friday Night Lights, and he's really good in everything, I think. And it's been an interesting show so far. So that's the only one so far. But I think as time progresses, I'll dive into a few more here. And I've definitely been looking at everybody's list of ones to check out and plan on doing that.
Yeah, I haven't been able to commit to anything yet. I've just been rewatching Atlanta. I watched a movie Sunday night. Started a movie last night, didn't finish it, but I'm sure I will get into it sooner rather than later in terms of binging something, whether on Amazon or Netflix. And I'll have to check out that thread. Is that on the Insiders Forum or the Fighting Gamecock Forum?
Yeah, it's on the Insiders Forum.
Perfect.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so if y'all aren't an insider to Gamecock Central and you want all the best recommendations for things to watch during the quarantine, sign up for Gamecock Central. Never been a better time. Get all the content that you're going to need to get you through the quarantine. And with that, as I mentioned, we do have a little bit of Gamecock news to talk about today. South Carolina, by the time you've heard this, has landed another commit for the class of 2021. Remarkably, the NCAA said no more recruiting. Now, obviously, that means no more in-person visits to limit the contact and practice social distancing and things like that. I guess before we get into the specifics of Carolina's commit, what does this look like now for college coaches and for South Carolina specifically? Because obviously you can still text and you can still call if that's allowed. I can't remember. I know we literally just went over it last week for my benefit, and I've already forgotten whether or not this is a dead period or a live period, and if you can text and if you can call. What is the state of college football recruiting right now, Chris?
Yeah, so really, one quick clarification. So dead period, open period, contact period, eval period, all these different, period definitions, those really don't have to do with contact over the phone, over social media, mailings, things like that. There are separate rules for those. Any of those particular periods always have to do with, in-person contact or evaluations, whatever they may be. Generally, and it's going to be a general statement without getting into the specific time frames, but it's really pretty open as far as phone contact. Now, college coaches, for example, they get one phone call at a particular time, this particular stretch, up until a prospect's, certain time that he's in high school, for example. And then after that, you get one a week during outside of a contact period. During a contact period, it's at the school's discretion. So, it's a big sort of jumble of different terms, but a dead period or this recruiting shutdown that we're seeing right now, is still open for college coaches to communicate with prospects. And in fact, that's still been happening a lot. They're still trying to, keep prospects on the hook. There are a lot of them actually that were planning on visiting at the end of March or into April. You look at the spring game, things like that. You look at camps. Are those going to be affected? We don't know yet. But yeah, so there's still a lot of communication there. So I think obviously the biggest change is that there's no visits right now to campuses, and that's pretty significant. But you've also got the fact that, the spring evaluation period for the coaches is also, a thing it starts April 15th normally and runs through the end of May. So that's a big one because that's when the head coach can't go out, but the 10 assistants can all go out on the road, get 2 evaluations per prospect. You can go, say, watch a spring practice. You can go get their transcript, go talk to their high school coaches, things like that. So I'd say those are the 2 biggest things right now that have been affected. But in terms of social media and, sending out edits to prospects and talking to them over the phone, those things can still take place right now.
So, Wes, what does this mean specifically for South Carolina? Obviously, this is an important class. And it's just March, so this is really the early stages. But as we talk about South Carolina having a new commit, the third one of this 2021 class, and obviously it's not like the entire recruitment happened in this short quarantine period. There was already a relationship there. This is just a matter of following up and getting a commitment and having an offer and, all those things that are kind of a formality. It's not like the entire courtship has happened in the last week. But is it harder? Is it an advantage? Is it a disadvantage? I know the playing field is sort of leveled for everybody, but does this put Carolina behind because they were already a school that's, especially when you start to go for some of these higher star recruits, like the 4- and 5-star guys, the on-campus visits seem to be what has helped South Carolina because it's hard to make a pitch over the phone and be like, hey, we just went 4-8. We have great facilities. You can't see them. We got all this cool stuff. You can't see it. You can't be here. Does that put Carolina at a disadvantage?
I don't know. I mean, like you said, it is an even playing field. I think the thing, obviously with them getting a 4-star guy today, that's a big pickup for them. And, I think you look, it probably hurts most with the guys that have never been on your campus and have, maybe were interested in checking you out this spring for spring practice, and maybe you're out-of-state guys and, you look at, we'll obviously get into Colten here in a second, but just using him as an example, as a guy who's been on your campus already multiple times, for those guys, the fact that you still can talk on the phone and text and, the kids can call the coaches anytime they want, you're just sort of continuing a relationship there. And the recruiting ban right now, the dead period, really probably has minimal effect with the guys that have already been on your campus many times. But, every player takes the process a little bit differently. This would be a time, I think, especially you start looking into April and the fact that, the evaluation period for prospects, the spring before their senior year is a big time for coaches to go out and see high schools and, check them out in person and send out a bunch of new offers. Obviously, it appears that's not going to happen. I don't guess that the June camps have been officially canceled at this point, but I'd say those are probably in grave danger as well as far as taking place the way they normally do, and that's a huge evaluation time for South Carolina. So, I think your guys that you were already strongly in on and had visited several times and stuff, this is probably really not a factor at all. I think it's more about your juniors who are rising seniors that would maybe be getting an offer from schools like South Carolina, and now they're not because they're not going to be seen. So I think it maybe affects your evaluation process. But again, I think that's for everybody. It may be a little bit harder on programs like South Carolina, though, in that it probably isn't a factor at all with sort of your logo programs, we call it, like your traditional top 10 programs that are recruiting off of their logo alone at times, and not their logo alone, but where their logo carries such value with prospects.
Then would it be fair to say that this maybe has an impact more on the bottom of the class for South Carolina, and not even maybe necessarily the bottom of the class, but the back end of the class, the guys that they're going to evaluate later that they wouldn't, like maybe they would have gotten a head start on now that they're not going to get a chance to, and then maybe even the class of 2022?
Yeah, I think it could. I mean, I think there's going to be a catch-up, once this thing finally, I don't even know what the terminology is. Once life gets somewhat back to normal in terms of the sports world, I think there's going to be a big catch-up period. Who knows what the schedule will be like at that point? Are they going to allow camps? Or are they not? If it's backing all the way up into the actual start of the college football season, then your focus has to be on getting your current team ready. It can't really be on recruiting and evaluation and all that. So then I think it puts a huge onus on your recruiting support staff to do a good job with evaluation and stuff like that. So, yeah, I think there's a lot of questions right now, man, that can't be answered. But, and again, we're talking about this through the prism of college football recruiting. Obviously, the grand scheme, this is all, small potatoes. But I think certainly every aspect of every sport, and from recruiting to team to whatever, there's going to have to be adjustments. And as with anything, whoever adjusts to what's happening the best is going to be the team and the programs that have an advantage over the others.
Yeah, the implications for this current team are obviously fascinating, and we'll get to those in just a second. But since we have started talking about recruiting and since we do have news, I don't know, it's funny. We're recording this. It's 11 o'clock on Wednesday morning right now, so it has not broken yet. I don't know which one of you is going to break it, which one of you is going to write the story about this commit, but obviously by the time you're listening to this, that news will be broken. So whichever one of you is writing the story or breaking this news, tell us about Carolina's new 4-star commit.
Yeah, I believe he'll be breaking the story himself on Twitter, but
Perfect.
The story is already written. So South Carolina, earlier today, as you're listening to this, lands a commitment from Hebron Academy 4-star quarterback Colten Gauthier. He's a pro-style guy, 6'3". He's listed 205. I think he's actually more up into the 215 range from what I've heard the latest weigh-in for him. He's a number 14 pro-style quarterback in the country, number 26 overall prospect in the state of Georgia, and someone that really South Carolina has been on for almost a year now. I was looking back through his recruitment, like some of the old stories on him. They offered way back in May last spring. That was, of course, when Dan Warner was the quarterback's coach. He visited a couple times then, was back on campus for a summer camp where he threw for Dan Warner. Chris and I actually had a chance to watch him out there. Big armed kid, can make all the throws, to throw all the quarterback cliches at you. But, Warner really sort of, I guess, dove in on him as one of their primary, if not the top 2021 target at quarterback. And for much of the year, I would say it looked like South Carolina was probably going to be the destination. Visited for the Kentucky game in the middle of the year. Then South Carolina's season, of course, tanked. Then Dan Warner, retired or was let go, whatever terminology you use. And then Mike Bobo came in and, was sort of reassessing the quarterback board. So I would say at that point it became a little bit more up in the air. But he was back on campus. It's almost 2 weeks now for one of the spring practices. I think that was a big visit for him just to be around Bobo. For what I understand, really liked the energy. South Carolina sort of doubled back down on him as a target, let him know that he was wanted, let him know that he could be their guy at quarterback in this class. And, it sort of just took off from there. And I think just reaffirmed what I believe. I mean, I was looking back, Chris and I put in our predictions for South Carolina with him back in the summer. At the time, it looked like he might, make an early commitment to South Carolina. And I think just being back on campus a couple of weeks ago reaffirmed everything for him. Had some nice Power 5 offers. Let's see, Boston College. This is in alphabetical order: Boston College, Colorado, Duke, Georgia Tech, Florida State, Kentucky, Louisville, Maryland, Miami, Missouri, Ole Miss, Indiana, Pitt, South Florida, Vandy, Virginia Tech, and West Virginia. So not quite that like elite 5-star offer list or ranking, but you look at what South Carolina's been able to do, quarterback recruiting. Obviously, Luke Doty already on campus, Ryan Helinski already on campus, 4-star guys. And I think really good position with Gunnar Stockton already for 2021. To be able to add another 4-star kid to the mix, I think is certainly a big pickup for them as they continue to sort of just restock that quarterback room.
Pocket passer or balanced?
I would say firmly a pocket passer. He's not a statue. He can run it. Probably, I was talking to Chad Simmons, who does a great job covering Georgia for us. He said he's a little bit more athletic than he's probably given credit for, but this is a pro-style type quarterback all the way. And actually, I think that's something that appeals to him, is the Mike Bobo's offense, the scheme that they're putting in, how that sort of fits what his skill set sort of is right now. I know he's probably a little bit more spread in high school and shotgun and stuff, but he really fits, I think, what South Carolina wants to do. And that's something South Carolina has pushed really hard, not just with Colten, but with all the offensive prospects, has been what type of playmakers and quarterbacks that Bobo has been able to develop and put out over the years. The guys that have played in his scheme and have gone on to the NFL is something that this staff has pushed really hard since Mike Bobo arrived.
All right, so if Tom Brady and Peyton Manning are like a 0 and Aaron Rodgers is like a 5 and Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson are 10, with 0 being pocket passer, 10 being runner, and 5 being balanced. I'm making this more complicated than it needs to be because that's what I do. I'm curious because you say pocket passer, and I'm imagining Peyton Manning, and I know you said that he's probably more athletic than he gets credit for, but is he closer to Peyton Manning or Tom Brady, or is he closer to like a balanced sort of like good pocket mobility, at least like Aaron Rodgers?
Chris, you want to weigh in on this?
Yeah, I would say he'd be in between. So, I mean, like with Rodgers, his thing is just Aaron Rodgers is maybe one of the more gifted, like, pocket navigators you'll see in terms of just being able to buy time. He's not going to go, he's not going to go Lamar Jackson, who's the full 10. Right. Interesting that you had Allen and Lamar Jackson in the same category. I feel like Lamar Jackson should be like a 100 out of 10 as far as
I guess Josh Allen just runs so much and is pretty good at it. It's a different kind of running than Jackson, though. You're right.
If Lamar is our standard in this as a 10, I mean, Allen to me is probably an 8, right? Like an 8.
I guess I'm thinking more like tendency and skill set more than like how good are you at this thing. Because Rodgers will scramble for a first down every once in a while, but he will mostly stay in the pocket, but he has the mobility, which is why I feel like he's balanced. And then Peyton Manning and Tom Brady only leave the pocket to walk to the sideline after a drive.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, I would say, Colton's not in that category as far as just no mobility, but he's, and gosh, it's hard to even say, okay, he's closer to Aaron Rodgers, because if you're close to Aaron Rodgers in terms of pocket presence, then you're awesome at it, So I would say he's, I don't know, maybe a 2 or 3 in that area, something like that. But when you're rating it that way, Rodgers would be very low on the, not very low. He'd be lower on the scrambling type of outside the pocket navigation, but in the pocket, he's, as good as we've ever seen. Mm-hmm. So it's sort of hard to rate him. But, Colton's more of that guy who's going to, could he run some zone read stuff for Carolina, et cetera. Maybe, I don't know, if we're going to make like a current Gamecock, comparison, maybe a notch above Ryan Helinski. Is that fair, Wes? Somewhere
kind
around
of Dylan
there.
Thompson-y, maybe.
Yeah, that might be fair. But Dylan
because Dylan obviously not known for his scrambling, but also picked up that 3rd and 19 against Clemson, and I mean, he could get outside of the pocket if he absolutely needed to.
Yeah, I would say if I'm just looking at the numbers the way you presented them, from a tendency standpoint, just watching his film at least, the number is very low. Like his tendency is absolutely, I'm going to get the ball out, whether it's short passing game or down the field passing game. He's not looking to run really much at all. I think as far as ability and potential and, athleticism, that number is maybe more like a 3 or so, 3.5, whereas the actual tendency is probably more like a 1.5 or something. Like he is from a tendency standpoint, very much a pass first, pass second, pass third. I've actually got his film up right now. But I mean, as I'm talking about him, there's a play. If anybody goes to this depth and it wants to look, it's his highlights from this year at about the 3-minute mark. He drops back. He's got two guys bearing down on him from the outside. He takes sort of one little half step up into the pocket. Then he has a linebacker about to hit him, and he delivers the ball at the guy at his feet. So, the ability in the pocket to sort of keep his eyes downfield and make throws and throw the ball with guys hitting him, I think is something that he's going to be pretty good at. And certainly it's going to be a big jump. He's another – you see more and more guys, I feel like, especially quarterbacks with this class and especially from Georgia that are private school quarterbacks. And, he does play private school ball. So the size of the guys he'll be against at the next level, there's going to be a huge jump. There's another play, let's see, 3-minute, 40-second mark where he just dodges basically a defender that has a free shot at him and delivers the ball about 40 yards downfield on a rope. So
it's not going to cause me pain to watch him move?
No.
Okay, good. All right. That's all I needed to know. Because, anytime you watch Peyton Manning run, it's like, ow, 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 ow. Like every step looks like it hurts. Even Ryan Helinski, a little bit like that, just because you're like, oh, don't do that. But, sounds like he's more of a statue than the new guy. Now, it won't matter if you have a transcendent arm like Peyton Manning, like Tom Brady. If you just want to be a pocket passer and you're amazing at it, then power to you. But just curious to get an in-depth scouting report and, again, make this way more complicated than it needs to be.
You absolutely succeeded at that. But I think the other thing with Colten is that, again, talking to Chad a bit, he's a driven kid, hard worker, has the mental side of the game, takes it very seriously. I think especially with quarterbacks, man, that's a big part of it. If you want to be a pocket passer, Mike Bobo talked about this a bit as well. It's not just, you said transcendent. It's not just that ability to physically throw the ball. It's to have a mental feel for, everything that's going on around you and to have all the answers. If you're a quarterback and that's your game, you got to have all the answers offensively where you're putting the ball to the right spot. You know when to check down. You know when to throw the ball away, as opposed to relying on, your feet and your athleticism and stuff like that. And Colten and, all of South Carolina's quarterbacks that they've signed recently have that, sort of mental makeup where they're hard workers and they spend the extra time in the quarterback room and the meeting room. So I think that's a big part of it as well with him. And again, to be able to get a guy like this on top of, with everyone knowing Luke Doty is already on campus and has played well during the spring, and you have Ryan Helinski as a young quarterback. I think this is a really nice pickup considering all those things. And the highlights are still running as I'm talking. There are a few as you get deeper into his highlights, 5 to 6 minute mark. He does run a little bit of zone read. He does get to the outside. Actually, a pretty tough runner. He puts his head down, not the fastest guy, but he puts his head down and mows over some guys. Granted, they are smaller than him, but again, just a lot to like about him. With quarterbacks, guys, I feel like it's always potential. It's a bit of a crapshoot when you're evaluating quarterbacks, and only one of them can play, as we know. So about what half of your quarterbacks are going to be a bust for whatever reason, but it's just about signing the right type of guys, the right type of kids, the right type of skill set, and then letting the cream sort of rise to the top within your offensive scheme, I think.
Last recruiting thing, since Carolina is not on campus, and obviously the equation, or rather the calculus of how the coaches can now approach recruiting certainly changes, but now the coaches don't have to worry about spring practice because that's not going on, and we're going to talk about the implications of that in just a second. But, Chris, should we now expect this to be a more prolific period for recruiting? Should we expect a lot more recruiting news over the course of the next month than we normally would have, or will it still be kind of slow because the contact is so limited?
I don't know that it'd be fair to say to expect more. And the reason I say that is because there's not going to be, in-person visits for, the foreseeable future for quite a while. Now, that said, South Carolina landed a guy today. There are some potential targets that could drop, whether later in March and April. Those things could happen. I just don't think because of all this we're going to see like an uptick in recruiting activity. I mean, I think, even without all this, it's something we've talked about on the site a lot. South Carolina's recruiting momentum, maybe in this cycle not as high as last year, the year before. And what I mean by that is I don't know that we can go into the summer expecting South Carolina to have double digits on the commitment list. And there's a lot of things that go into that, but obviously the season didn't go very well last year. There's, the perception that this is a year in which Will Muschamp and his staff really need to win. There wasn't as much early traction with some 2021 targets. Obviously, they've landed a couple guys, and both of those guys were unexpected. This one, not really unexpected, but one that you look at, and I think you look at South Carolina as fortunate to be able to get Colten Gauthier at this point. So I just don't think we can expect an uptick. I don't know that it'll necessarily be super slow, and there's still going to be a lot of contact, over the phone, over social media between coaches and prospects. And I do think that we could see more commitments between now and the end of April into May. I just don't think that it'd be tough to sit here and say, yeah, they're going to be able to land double-digit commitments in the 21 class. That's sort of hard to project right now.
But if they do, Gamecock Central will be on it, and y'all want to be on Gamecock Central and insiders and all that stuff, because if anything happens, it's going to be the only thing to talk about. So you better know about it first so you can tell your friends so you can be the cool guy. The other confusing part of the football question, and like the actual football, not just the recruiting, that I want to get to, we'll do this vis-a-vis a little Q&A, a little mailbag, because we did put a thread up on the Insider Forum, so thank you all, as always, to those of you that posted questions, and S-Car fan in Bama sort of preempted this topic, so I'll give him a little bit of a shout-out here and just read his questions. As when it comes to football, to a certain extent, the cancellation of spring practice is going to affect every team in every conference the same way. I guess that's a refrain we're going to hear from coaches a bunch whenever SEC Media Days roll around, but some teams still may be affected by this a bit more than others. For example, I'd guess that teams who plan to implement wholesale schematic changes on offense and or defense would be affected more so than those who plan to return more elements of what they ran last season. So staffs with higher turnover could be affected more than those that return both their coordinators and their head coach. Similarly, teams that plan to introduce new starters at key roles like quarterback will miss a lot of those lost reps, more so than teams that return a higher percentage of starters. Any other factors you guys can think of that might cause a team to suffer from the loss of spring ball more so than other teams, and any particular examples of teams in the SEC you guys can point to of folks who might feel it the most? Sorry for the long-winded question. Stay safe out there. Thanks, y'all. Thanks for the question. You hit on a lot of things that I think are important to think about, and I don't know if you were like just intentionally leaving out South Carolina or want us to really discuss that on like a bigger picture. But South Carolina, I think fits all those things that you were wondering about. And a lot of the conversation around South Carolina this spring has been, this is the most important spring, certainly of the Will Muschamp era. I mean, more important than any spring that Steve Spurrier ever had. When we had Josh Kendall on our local show a couple weeks ago, or maybe it was David Cloninger. Now I'm giving someone the not the right credit. But somebody that we talked to that's been covering South Carolina for a long time said it's probably the most important spring since Lou Holtz's second year because of some of the things that S-Car fan and Bama mentioned in terms of implementing a new offensive scheme with Mike Bobo. But more than that, Carolina just needed to get a lot better. So before we talk about that specifically, what can Carolina's players and coaches be doing in the spring because they're not on campus, they can't be together, practice has been canceled. What can they still do?
I mean, go ahead, Chris.
Well, I was going to say, I do know that the players, obviously, when in a unique situation like this, is very challenging for everyone. Players, coaches, think about the strength staff. I mean, they've outlined all these different things, and really the caveat is you need a weight room to be able to do them. And so they can give the players guidance on those things, but the players have to, do them on their own. They have to find, where are you going to work out? I mean, I imagine a lot of players can go to their old high school, gym, if provided it's open or wherever it may be. But that's a challenge. Then you've got, the schematic issue with Mike Bobo putting in a new offense. Now, a lot of SEC schools have that. You look at, just off the top of my head, Vanderbilt, Ole Miss, Arkansas, LSU, with Joe Brady leaving, Mississippi State. Georgia. A lot of places schematically.
The entire conference.
Most of the conference. They've got new offenses going in. So this is affecting a lot of people. And then, your off-season, your lifting program during the spring. All those things are affected. And so I don't know the rules about, that's a good question. We need to get an answer to as far as is it still just the same amount of meeting time, but they can do it virtually? I really don't know. I do know that the players can access, certain things remotely if they want to. Obviously, it's on them to do so to where they can keep up with, hey, maybe looking at this film or whether it's a workout plan, things like that. Those they're able to do. I just don't know haven't heard yet the particulars on how that is. I do know that several folks have just told me it's a pretty challenging time, given all those factors that they just can't meet in person. South Carolina has this new facility where everything's right there. You got your weight room, you got nutrition, you got meeting rooms, you got the practice field. All those things are integrated, and now all those things are completely separated. And so you take all those components. You don't even think about the nutrition. For these players, they can really refuel these players, and now you're losing all that. And I don't want to say this is not good news, quote unquote, but all schools right now are in that same boat. It is going to be more difficult on a place like South Carolina or anybody that's putting in a new scheme because you're not getting that practice time. So I think it's just going to be key what happens going forward. What does July look like? What does preseason camp look like? Is there extra time given? We don't know those things. And so it is challenging that they missed out on this practice time. Will they get some of it back? I think that's the question that has to be answered before we can truly, truly assess the impact.
But we can all agree that this is not a great situation for South Carolina.
Not at all. No.
How detrimental does this actually end up being? Spring is important for a lot of reasons. The implementation of offense, I get that. Some things philosophically, developing a relationship with some of those players. But I feel like from what I have heard, talking to guys like, Langston Moore and Eric Kimmery and guys that have been through a lot of springs, there's not a ton of install that actually happens. Maybe some bigger picture concepts that the players are honestly probably already familiar with, but it's an opportunity to get reps for younger guys to sort of get a vague idea of what your depth chart is going to be and to just work on a lot of fundamentals, which South Carolina needed to improve in a lot of areas, especially offensively last year. Are we going to end up overstating how important it is that South Carolina missed this spring because a lot of the install isn't going to happen until later?
It's interesting because Will Muschamp has liked to structure spring earlier, and he's liked to structure it earlier because he feels it's better for the players. You have a longer recovery period, when you're going from end of spring to summer, guys who may have had surgeries or maybe got injured during spring, things of that nature. But I don't know. It's just, I'm not trying to give a cop-out answer. It's really hard to predict, and I don't know, is this thing going to go so far that South Carolina could only have a full slate of preseason camp, which that'll be good. Even that's in question right now. Heck, man, we don't know if we get to August. We don't know if they're going to be able to open training camp on time. I think everybody's assuming that, but I don't know if we should even assume that right now. I don't even know if we should assume the college football season is going to start on time. It seems like it will if this thing gets under control, but we really don't know. I mean, epidemiologists, scientists, all these people are saying, this thing's going to last months and then it could come back. So we just don't know. I think that's the question that has to get answered. Now, will the NCAA, let's say we're in July and things are all clear, are they going to say, okay, schools, you can now have, your quote unquote spring practice in July, and then you can follow that up with training camp? Because if that's the case, then you may be okay, because then you've basically got your full slates of practice, and now you've got them back to back to back to where there's more continuity in it. Then now you have another set of challenges then, because maybe players get worn down. You got to give them more rest. So everything's just so up in the air. I think it would be a great positive for South Carolina if they got some extra practice time back somehow, but we just don't know if that's the case. If the season proceeds as usual and all they get's just training camp and they only had, a handful of spring practices, that's obviously not a positive for them. A lot of other schools will be in the same boat, but not all. And South Carolina obviously needs all the practices they can get, not only to get better from an individual development standpoint. You look at wide receiver, running back, quarterback, but just implementing this offense as a whole, that's a big, big challenge for them. I just think there's too many questions right now. And my biggest one is, how much practice time do they get? Mm-hmm. Do they get a full training camp? Do they get some extra time because of this? And once we know that, I think we'll be able to better assess, okay, this may be okay. This may be far from ideal. Right now it's far from ideal, but we don't know if they're going to get some time back here in the future.
Yeah, and unfortunately, we won't have an answer on that for a while. But obviously, once we get a ruling on that one way or the other, we'll let y'all know and discuss the implications therein. Going to run through a couple more of these questions, again, from the Insider Forum. Thank you so much to anyone that posted a question. From SC Bobo 85, got an over-under suggestion. The number of college football programs in the SEC who are breaking the no recruiting order is over under 3. I will field this one and say, I truly believe that 95% of college football programs cheat in recruiting, whether it's paying athletes or just talking to them in impermissible ways at impermissible times. I'm 100% sure that goes on in at least a 95% rate. But in this case, because we're talking about a pandemic, I would say I would actually take the under of 3, because this isn't about an NCAA rule per se. It's about keeping everybody healthy. So I think all three of us are probably going to take the under on that, right?
Yeah, I am. I mean,
yeah.
Honestly, if it was anything else, if we were just talking about a normal situation, it may be a different answer. But the fact, like you said, it's a pandemic. This is a worldwide thing. And because they can still contact the guys electronically over the phone, DM, text message, etc. If there was some ban on any contact right now, then absolutely, it may be a different answer. But the fact that in order to break it, then your coaches would have to be out, when really they shouldn't be, and the kids would have to be out on your campus when really they shouldn't be, and the football offices at a lot of places are literally shut down. I think, as in the doors are probably locked. So, in this case, I'm going to think and hope that that places. I don't really know that you gain much right now from breaking the rules in this. And can you imagine the blowback if word got around that you were, breaking this rule? I mean, that the risk reward there is just not worth it.
Now, I mean, Nick Saban's like 70, right? So what if he goes out on a recruiting visit to try to land some 5-star guy and get an advantage while everybody else is on this recruiting ban, and he gets COVID-19 and dies? Like, that would be a horrible and insane and that's a lot different than risking, giving up 3 scholarships over, the course of 3 years. That the stakes in this are actually real. This is not about the NCAA. This is about IRL in real life. So all taking the under there. A couple of basketball questions. I'm just going to read these. This from USC Beckham. In your opinion, how should Don Staley and USC handle claiming a national championship? And then also from Gamecock 2001. Talk to Uriel's potential as a fluid athletic big. Does he look to be a more polished version of Kotsar? Can he ultimately defend like Kotsar did this season? I read those to say we will revisit these tomorrow. Colin Taylor and I are going to be back with another episode of The Hard Foul, recapping the season, talking about Colin's abbreviated visit to Nashville and what that was like to be in Nashville as they were canceling the SEC tournament and doing a lot of other things to wrap up the season. So we will address those questions on that podcast tomorrow, but thank you for asking them. We will get to those. This one from BL Gamecocks says, seems as if there is a little less hype and excitement about the next signing class than this time last year. I'm talking prior to coronavirus. Is it because the in-state talent is down? What do you guys think?
Yeah, and I think we
go ahead, Wes.
Yeah, and I was going to say, Chris sort of hit on that a little bit earlier. I think it's a combination of things. In-state being down, I believe, plays into it a bit. I think you look, obviously we talked about it all offseason, the fact they won 4 games last year. A big way that they were able to have the recruiting class that they had for the 2020 cycle was just that they had already done a really good job of building relationships with these kids. So it was a matter of sort of continuing what you've already built and keeping them invested in the idea of the future of the program when they already were sort of invested in that, as opposed to taking guys that are currently still open-minded and in a lot of cases looking at multiple other SEC programs and then comparing your record to their record. I think it makes it much more difficult right now for this year. Generally, with your South Carolina, you can sort of lean on the in-state crop, and you're going to have kids that just from a literal standpoint don't want to go that far from home. So even if they didn't grow up a particular South Carolina fan, the appeal of being able to get to Columbia relatively easy from anywhere in the state of South Carolina, I think helps South Carolina with a lot of in-state guys. And, you just don't, they're going after, as far as offered guys that they're like truly chasing right now. It's like, 4 guys, I guess. Well, and that includes Justice Boone, who is, already committed to Florida. You have a number of other guys that they're recruiting, could offer and go after, but necessarily haven't necessarily done that yet. So I think it's a combination of all those things that hurts South Carolina right now a bit in this recruiting class. And it's going to have to be a class that they hit on some evaluations. And, is that necessarily ideal? No, but I think the big thing is to continue to build relationships with these kids and then hope that you have a big season that you can build off of, and then as opposed to convincing kids after a rough season, hey, you still need to be all in with us, you're sort of turning it and saying, hey, you already like us, you already like the program, you like the facilities, you like the coaches, now you're seeing progress again on the field, so why don't you join us? I think the class probably, and this probably would have been the case even before everyone was dealing with coronavirus fallout. But certainly now with everything being put on hold, I think this is the class that you probably put together a little bit more down the road.
There's a second part to BL Gamecock's question, and I'm going to reframe it a little bit. He said, what is the over-under number that Will Muschamp needs to hit to be the coach again in 2021? My question now is, with spring either being canceled or possibly postponed, again, we don't exactly know, with training camp still possibly being affected, and frankly, the season could still end up being affected. I don't know if that's likely at this point, given how far away it is, but we really have no idea. I think all of us agree before this happened, heading into the spring, another 5-7, say, year for South Carolina would have meant the end of the Will Muschamp era at South Carolina. Does now this crisis and truncated spring, potentially truncated training camp, and just general weird situation heading into the football season, does that kind of make this year, I don't know, does that give Will Muschamp like a little more leeway? Like, could another 5-7 season or so be absorbed because it's like, well, you brought in all these new coaches and they didn't have time to implement their stuff because of the COVID-19, and you can't hold that against Will Muschamp? Or is this still going to end up just being a put up or shut up kind of year?
It could. Again, so many unanswered questions. Are they going to have practice at all? Seriously. People say, well, that's stupid, Chris. We don't know. Are they going to have a few practices? If they do have a few practices, are they going to like push the season back a little bit and let them have more? Will a game be canceled? Will two? We don't know. And so, yeah, you're right, Pearson. I mean, I think you look at it, if you look at just on the surface, none of this matter, without any of this, full slate and everything, the practice, spring, summer, preseason, regular season length, not getting back to a bowl would be a situation in which I think it would be very fair to say that there likely be a change then. But we're not even there right now. We don't know. We don't know, again, are they going to have spring practice in June, or something like that. And we just don't know what the circumstances are. And so there's probably some point where even if, there's no spring practice and they had a full slate of preseason, for example, you couldn't go and expect a staff to win, say, 2 games or something like that and stick around. But it's everything right now is so hard to predict. I think if you're looking at the fact that the season is going to be somewhat normal, and by that I mean there's going to be some practice, there's going to be a full slate of games, and I still say it's a bowl game, is what sort of it has to be. But again, we don't even know what the circumstances are going to be, and those could play a hand in dictating some of that thought process.
Last question from the Insider Forum, and Wes, you touched on this a little bit, so a little bit of a retread here, but a different question from RL John 1914 says, do you believe the virus situation will impact recruiting more in-state guys? For instance, will we go after more in-state wide receivers like J.J. Jones or Omega Black? Would it help more with a Justice Boone, who is committed to Florida, or a Big T? Just wondering if our recruiting net has to get a little bit smaller.
That's an interesting thought for sure. I think there may be I really can't say if it does or doesn't affect those guys in particular. I think that's very hard to say. In a general standpoint, does it make you sort of have to focus in on some guys that are a little bit closer that, some of those guys don't have offers yet, like Omega Blake, J.J. Jones, are 2 in-state guys that a lot of fans want South Carolina to offer. Does it almost force you to say, okay, these are local guys, these are guys you can land. You haven't been able to get in some of the out-of-state prospects for visits this spring that you wanted to. You haven't been able to evaluate out-of-state guys the way you wanted to. Do you sort of have to focus in on some guys you can absolutely land that are solid players in their own right? I think maybe so. I mean, Chris, I don't know what your take is on it. I'd like to hear that as well. But I hadn't really thought about that aspect of it. But depending on how long things were sort of shut down, and depending on, again, it's going to depend on those particular position groups as well. Do they start looking at out-of-state wide receivers and say, hey, we're not really in great shape with a bunch of out-of-state guys. We haven't been able to get them on campus. We need to refocus back in on some in-state kids. Then absolutely, I think you could see that happen.
Yeah, it all does, and I hope people don't start getting frustrated by us saying, I don't know. But right now, that's an acceptable answer, I think, to some questions, because it all depends. I mean, let's get through April, May. And then the recruiting calendar reopens and South Carolina is able to say have camp. And then they're able to get guys on campus in June. Then, will they take that normal like late June to July dead period and open it back up given this? Maybe. And so do they do that? Does that allow South Carolina to get some guys who are priorities? They do have some out-of-state priorities at a lot of positions, like wide receiver would be one, for example. If all that's the case, then maybe not. I don't think the staff right now is in position where they're thinking, okay, we're going to have to start reaching on guys. Not to say that, Omega Blake could end up getting an offer. Maybe J.J. Jones does end up getting an offer. Those are actually possible. But I don't think they're sitting there right now saying this is what we're going to have to do to fill out the class. Now, could it get there to where maybe you assess the board and you say, look, because of this, we simply weren't able to get this guy on campus. If you don't get a guy on campus from out of state, you're probably not going to sign him. So it just depends on the timing, I think, where, how much time do they have to get some of these guys on campus, whether it's in the summer or during the season, right after the season. If a guy ends up signing, say, in February, will this push some guys' decision back? That's another question. Will we have a more lean early signing period this year to have some guys take some more time to go out and visit some schools? That's also possible. So just a lot of unanswered questions, and I think saying I don't know is totally fine. The in-state thing, I think, is one of those. Look, Wes hit on this. I mean, there are a handful of guys that are priorities in state. That's not changing regardless. Could there be one or two more to pop up because of all this that may end up getting an offer? Maybe. I think it's dependent on the calendar and how all that falls.
Maybe, but all we know is that it'll be close. Thank you all for your questions today.
Yeah.
Thanks for your continued support. We're going to try to hopefully get better at this. I think this went pretty well today, considering this is our first podcast, just doing it all remote. That was another question.
This is the no huddle edition. Chris and I are actually used to this. We did these here in the season on Mondays, and this has worked well with the call-in stuff. And again, I know we've already said it, but I want to reiterate. Yes, we are talking about the effects of COVID-19 and as far as football goes. We obviously know that right now football and recruiting and all this stuff is not important in the grand scheme of things. So everybody take care of yourself. Help every individual right now can help take care of the collective whole by listening to the guidelines that have been put out by our government, CDC, everyone involved in this, and everyone that knows, frankly, way more than all of us do about what's happening. But we're doing this more in lines of everyone's at home. Everyone obviously wants us to continue content. So as much as everyone's having to change their day-to-day lives and what they do physically right now, we are doing our best to try to continue to produce the content that people like to consume in lieu of not being able to watch actual sports right now.
Yeah,
so,
and help y'all get through it if we can.
Yeah, because most people, I believe, have understood that. We got a little bit of feedback on one of our Facebook pages when we posted a story that was basically like, and it was from one of the interviews, I think with Frank Martin. It was like, don't worry about if Dawn Staley got to play for a national title or not. Worry about the people, that are affected by this. And, those two things are not mutually exclusive. Like, I'm sure Frank Martin, I'm sure Ray Tanner, I'm sure everybody at South Carolina, they've said this. Everyone involved is concerned about everyone else involved in this because we're all in this together. But that doesn't mean we can't be disappointed for the seniors who never got a chance to compete for a championship. That doesn't mean that we can't miss sports. You're not a bad person if you're missing the aspects of your lives that you enjoyed, because we all have sports as a hobby for a reason, because it does make us happy. It helps us stay mentally sane, in a lot of ways, I think, which is obviously a positive. So, follow. Hopefully, I'm saying all this to where it makes sense. Follow all the guidelines that are out there, but at the same time, it's okay for us to miss sports, and it's okay, I think, for us to continue to talk about sports while trying to follow the guidelines that are out there.
I couldn't agree more. So that's why, like you said, Wes, just listen to the guidelines and listen to us, because we hope that you enjoy it. And thank you again for your continued support. Resume normalcy as much as humanly possible, but resume normalcy in a way that's safe. It's normal for us to keep doing this podcast, but a little bit of a twist. We're not together. We're many miles apart, more than 6 feet. So we're meeting the minimum requirement there. But as always, again, thank you for the continued support. Thank you for all the questions on the Insider Forum. Y'all be on the lookout for more of these regular sort of mailbag threads as we get into the offseason. We were going to start doing that anyway, and so now just another opportunity, I guess, to get that started a little bit earlier. But thank you all for listening. Don't forget to rate, review, subscribe to this and everything on the Gamecock Central Podcast Network. Colin Taylor and I will be back with a season wrap-up edition of The Hard Foul. And then Chris and Wes and I will be back next Wednesday. Also, y'all, don't forget to subscribe to GamecockCentral.com because, like I said, content aplenty. It seems like there's even more than we have during the season. So if you need entertainment or information, some combination of those things. GamecockCentral.com, Gamecock Central Podcast Network. Thanks so much for listening. We'll talk to you next week.